The best friend of the Persona 3 protagonist, Junpei Iori, is a character that has debatably the most growth out of any character in Persona 3, and to an extent Persona in general. Junpei's growth through Persona 3 is one that has stuck with me through the years, and he's a character I have a lot of fondness and respect for. In this video, I'll be going over his growth as a character, and as always, I'll also be giving additional context by going in detail about the mythology and reasoning of his personas and arcana as well. I don't want to take too much of your time, so let's go ahead and get into the background of Junpei and learn more about him. Junpei is a somewhat brash, immature, and perverted 11th grader at the school Gekkoukan High, located in Iwatodai City, which is the main setting of the game. He's not too popular and sees himself as a ladies' man despite not having much luck with them at the beginning of the story, which frustrates him. Since he gets ignored a lot and isn't very popular, he puts on a class clown.
Wandering around like a clown.
Okay, thank you, Junpei, for cutting me off. That's very nice of you. But anyway, he's really far from it because he has a lot of internal problems he has yet to face. His relationship with his father is not good to say the least due to his alcoholism, which Junpei laments him for. But once he gets a chance to move out into the S.E.E.S dorms, like many of the other team members, he would prefer to be away from home if at all possible. With that said, he sees himself as just about as pathetic as his dad since he doesn't have much going for him. He doesn't do any extracurricular activities, he doesn't have many true friends, and he doesn't take school seriously. All of this combined leads to an extent of self-hatred and disappointment for himself. He's desperate to find something in his life to live for, like a way to change the world, and despite the disdain he has for himself, he does still care for those in his life, not too dissimilar to the protagonist himself. This is shown when he is first introduced in Makoto's first day at Gekkoukan High. He introduces himself and tries to be his friend by talking to him, walking home with him, and things along those lines. He's also friends with Yukari Takiba, a popular girl and archer at the school, who tends to pick on him a lot near the start of the game, but that's something to be elaborated on more throughout the analysis. All of these qualities are the reason Junpei's chosen arcana was that of the Magician. The Magician Arcana is the first trump card in the major tarot card deck and represents power, potential, immaturity, action, initiative, and the unification of the physical and spiritual worlds. This represents Junpei very well because he is very immature throughout a lot of Persona 3, has some of the highest physical power with his persona, is brash and bold with his actions, which also represents his initiative, and he can step in and out of Tartarus, a dungeon of torment for the wicked. It also ties in with his first tier persona, but I will get to that in a moment. Junpei probably has the highest amount of potential in terms of growth of heart and power when it comes to the main group of S.E.E.S, which is represented by his change throughout the game many times through meeting characters like Chidori, Makoto, Yukari, and the experiences he goes through. I'm willing to argue that he probably had the most change internally out of anyone in the game because he was the most empty character in the whole game aside from Makoto, but even he found a reason to fight much sooner than Junpei did. Okay, I believe we got a decent amount of the important aspects of his backstory and character covered, so let's go to the beginning of the story. As I mentioned before, Junpei is introduced on Makoto's first day of school and tries to be his friend immediately, saying he knows how it is to be the new kid, which shows his care for others as I previously mentioned as well. Yukari picks on him a little bit, and after that, Junpei and Makoto walk home together. Shortly after that, on April 19th, it's revealed that Junpei has the potential of Persona, and at this point I need to go over his first tier persona, Hermes. Hermes is an Olympian deity in ancient Greek religion and mythology, and was considered an officer in arms for the gods. He was usually depicted as a mature man with a beard, and was considered a god of many things, such as a god of boundaries and shepherds. Hermes began as a god with underworld associations, and acted as a psychopomp, which is a leader of souls along the road between underworld and upper worlds. He was also considered a shepherd god because he saved a town from a plague. Hermes was also considered a god of athletes and speed in some regard, which is shown by his experience playing baseball before the events of Persona 3, as well as him becoming a baseball coach in Persona 4 Arena Ultimax. It also explains his interest in the manga he reads with Makoto. Homer portrayed Hermes as the author of skilled or deceptive acts, and also a benefactor of mortals. In the Iliad, he's called the bringer of good luck, a guide and guardian, and excellent in all tricks. In Athens, busts of Hermes would be placed outside houses and as markers as a symbol of protection and guidance. He was a divine ally of the Greeks, but also willing to help his enemies of Troy as demonstrated when he protected Priam. This point is representative of his alliance with S.E.E.S and Chidori, who is technically their enemy. Hermes could have been chosen for Junpei for a couple of reasons. Since Hermes is a messenger of the gods, and Junpei oftentimes wants to be heard and recognized for his achievements, and can represent his view of himself, or more so what he wishes to be and what his heart reflects. Another reason could be that Hermes created the first lyre and gave it to Apollo, who then gave it to Orpheus, which became the source of his great power of charm. With this knowledge, it's clear to see why Makoto and Junpei are so closely tied together and become best friends as the game progresses. The biggest reason I believe he was chosen for Junpei though, is because of how he was described in the Iliad. Junpei brings good luck to the team, which is demonstrated by his combat characteristic of high crit chances, and he was definitely a guardian considering the fact he's a core part of S.E.E.S and brought much needed firepower to the group, which let him enter and leave Tartarus as a result, which is representative of Hermes' role as a god of boundaries since he could step in and out of the underworld essentially. Speaking of his role of boundaries and stepping between worlds, since Junpei is a part of S.E.E.S, once he meets Chidori, a member of the rival group of Persona users called Strega, he's the only one to have some sort of contact between both parties. They both fight for and represent very different things. S.E.E.S mostly represent camaraderie, growth, and salvation, while Strega represents the opposite. There isn't too much more to talk about regarding his first tier persona though, so we can continue onward with the story. Now that Junpei has joined S.E.E.S in the fight against shadows, they have enough numbers to explore Tartarus, which is the main dungeon of the story. When they go to Tartarus, Junpei's rashness and immaturity is shown where he acts all cocky and rushes right into fights, and in the movie, when he gets overpowered, Makoto comes to defeat the shadow in his and Yukari's stead, which makes him very angry. Since this newfound power is basically all he has going for him, he can't stand the thought of being inferior to Makoto, especially considering the fact he's a new transfer student. He feels like he could have matched what Makoto did, even though that's just definitely not true, but it shows where he is as a person at this moment in time. Going forward to the first real full moon operation of the game on May 9th, Junpei, Yukari, and Makoto are sent to defeat the priestess arcana that has taken over the railway they use to commute to and from school, and Junpei's jealousy is fully shown once they board the train. Before that though, I would like to mention the somewhat awful moment before they board the train where Junpei teases about looking of Yukari's skirt. Obviously this is a very, well, just not good thing to joke or tease about, and it's something I wasn't going to mention at first, but it is an important aspect of how he changes later on once he meets Chidori, so I just wanted to give at least one example of this aspect of his character. As the train starts speeding off, he tries to play the hero by rushing ahead on his own, and he arrogantly thinks he can defeat the priestess and shadows on his own, and he wants to prove he's better than Makoto. As he catches up to the priestess, he gets easily overpowered, at which point Makoto steps in to protect him, and in the movie, he says to Junpei, This moment is really nice because even this early on in the game, while he's still jealous of him thereafter, he begins to respect and appreciate Makoto as a leader and a friend more. Once they all team up to defeat the priestess shadow and Makoto luckily guesses on how to stop the train, his appreciation is shown. Shortly thereafter, Junpei invites Makoto to hang out at the arcade, at which point he says that the new power and mission they've been given is finally giving his life some meaning, which is a thought process that is both a blessing and a curse for him. Skipping forward a decent chunk to June 6th, the main trio at this point in the game head to the station outskirts where delinquents reside to find some answers for the disappearance of some of the students at their school. You might be wondering why I'm skipping around so much, and the reason for that is because Junpei's main growth doesn't happen until he meets Chidori a bit later on, so there isn't too much to talk about until then. Anyway, back on topic. Once they get to the station outskirts, Junpei is acting pretty cowardly, and it isn't that I particularly blame him for it, but it does show how his character differs from that of Yukari or Makoto at this moment. Despite putting on a big hero facade, when put face to face with some resistance, he can tend to fold, and this is a far cry from how he is later on in the story, just like most examples I've given, but we'll get to that soon, I swear, I don't mean to keep teasing. Once they defeat the Emperor and Empress Arcana shadows, and Fuka returns to the school the next day, during the movie, Junpei sees Makoto crack a smile and gets really happy about it, showing he does care for Makoto's well-being despite being jealous of his special abilities as the leader. Alright, enough teasing. We're gonna go ahead and skip to right before Junpei meets Chidori for the first time. This is a massive jump in terms of story, but this is when his character arc really starts to develop, so there's no need to repeat what we already know. A few days before he meets Chidori for the first time, in Reload, he asks Makoto to join him in a water-splitting party for Ken to make him feel more at home. When they get to the roof, Junpei says the bat he brought is the one he used to play baseball with, and he tries to act like he doesn't care if they ruin it, but everyone can see through him. It's clear he still has a fondness for the bat and his experiences playing baseball, so he couldn't hide his doubts about messing it up. After Akihiko comes and splits it in half for them, Junpei says this.
How the hell do I put it? This is a me problem. It probably doesn't make sense. I feel like my life, my teenage years, it's just all over the place.
This moment goes back to what I've reiterated a few times at this point, and that's the fact Junpei really doesn't feel like he has much to live for at this moment. The only thing he has to live for as of right now is the fight against the shadows, which is why his jealousy of Makoto is always subtly present throughout the game, even if it does dwindle as more time passes by. One last thing I would like to mention in this section before getting to Chidori is the full moon operation on August 6th. I like mentioning this full moon a lot because it's a good representation of how the party members feel about their power of Persona and the Dark Hour. As Sakaya and Jin of Strega ambush them in an underground bunker, they pick apart their reasons for fighting and poke at the fact that they actually enjoy having their special power. Junpei in this moment definitely shows some hesitation, which is just another representation of his doubt and second thoughts about himself. So finally, we get to where he meets Chidori for the first time. On August 20th, he sees her for the first time at Port Island Station, and when he tries to see what she's drawing, she basically tells him to get lost, which he does. It's clear he still has some sort of interest in her though, and on August 29th, when he sees her again at the same spot again, they actually manage to have the inklings of a real conversation. Junpei and Chidori are fairly similar in the sense that neither of them have much to live for, albeit their stances on that differ greatly at this point in the story, but that's what makes their growth together so interesting. A few days after the previous conversation, Junpei meets up with her again, and she ignores him for the most part. But when she walks away, Junpei notices that she's bleeding and offers to help her, but then she says this to him.
You're a weird one. Chidori.
Huh?
My name. You asked, didn't you, Junpei? I'm almost finished with the drawing. I doubt you'll be able to understand it. But if you want to see it so badly, then you know where to find me.
This is the first sign of Chidori becoming more comfortable with Junpei, and this is only shown when she asks Junpei what he does to make himself feel alive, at which point he gives a pretty simply just genius answer.
I don't know. Breathe, I guess?
After that, Chidori says she doesn't understand herself or why she draws what she does, but maybe since Junpei could see himself in her, he basically spills the beans to her about the Dark Hour, and since she's a Persona user of the rival group, he's more or less an unintentional rat in this moment. He tries to say he's the leader of S.E.E.S to make himself seem cooler than he is, showing his feelings of inferiority once more, and Chidori seemingly warms up to him a lot. For the most part, a lot of it was just smoke and mirrors, but over time the fake feelings she had for him actually developed into real ones, and that's because he never gave up on her. On September 5th, right before the next full moon operation, Junpei gets fired up at the thought of the work they're doing going towards protecting and saving people like Chidori, since he has an interest in her. But right as he says that, Chidori betrays him by tying him up and asking him to call off the operations they've been doing to defeat the Dark Hour. Since she thinks he's the leader, he was the target she chose to go after. But when Junpei reveals he was lying, instead of being hung up on the fact he's been kidnapped and that his life is in danger, he's more focused on whether or not the moments they had together were all fake or not. It shows how much he cared for her and how much he wants to be by her side. And despite being betrayed by her, he still cares for her, demonstrating how understanding and forgiving he can really be. And from that moment forward, Junpei would be the only one Chidori could trust. As she's in the hospital after the full moon operation and she's being questioned, Junpei rushes into the room to check on her, showing his loyalty and love for her. This is a very subtle detail, but the moment Junpei speaks to her, she stops drawing and has a painful expression on her face. Mitsuru and Akihiko are frustrated with her since she won't give them the answers they're looking for, but Junpei defends her time and time again. They consider taking her sketchbook away. He shuts that down immediately. Junpei is the one and only person she's willing to talk to and hear out, and that's because he didn't look down on her or treat her wrong like everyone else did. He trusted her and understood where she was coming from, and that's why with every subsequent visit, she opened up to him more and more. Quite a far cry from how others may see him, and it's a good showing of the more compassionate and mature side of himself. On September 10th, as they continue to monitor her, her persona, Medea, begins to attack her. Shinjiro is there, so he's able to give her the suppressants she needs, but then it's revealed that the suppressants Strega have to take are a result of them not having control of their personas, and the side effects of taking it are death. After Shinji gives her the suppressants, Junpei shows his worry, but then this back and forth occurs.
Dying just means you won't wake up tomorrow. That's all.
What the hell are you saying? You don't really mean that, do you?
Junpei?
I don't want that. You hear me, Chidori? I I don't want you to die.
Junpei.
It doesn't matter if you're not afraid. It's not the point. I don't want to have to live in a world without you.
You're so weird, Junpei.
Look who's talking.
This is the first time we see Chidori laugh, and it's one of the most important parts of her character, but in Junpei's case it really shows how his thoughts on death differ from hers. He's starting to find his reason for fighting and living, and that reason is also giving Chidori her own reason. The next visit a couple days later is the same premise, but Chidori's healing powers are revealed, and Junpei describes them as a miracle, which is pretty foretelling of what's to come if you know what happens later in the story. After that, they have this piece of dialogue.
Without this power, I'd be a nobody. I just talk a big game, pretending like I'm some kind of hero. But in reality, I don't know what the hell I'm fighting for. In fact, I don't even really have a good reason to live.
A good reason to live? Good reason. I hate hospitals.
Oh, you do. Sorry.
But you've been coming to see me here, so I don't mind as much this time.
Chidori. You mean it? Then I'll come to see you every day.
Again, this just reiterates a lot of what I've been saying. Since Junpei doesn't have much going for him outside of the fight against shadows, he doesn't have his reason to live, and he flat out admits it this time. He's starting to really recognize his faults, and that's one of the first big stepping stones to change. Hearing Chidori say she feels better about being in the hospital thanks to him fills him with a lot more hope, just as he has filled her with hope. The dynamic between them is one of the best, if not the best, in the game. They are so similar yet so different at the same time. Their backgrounds aren't the same, their views on a lot of things are different, yet despite all of this, the fact that Junpei has been there for her and she has been there for him has filled them both with life that they've previously been lacking all this time. They've been missing both their reasons to live, and by meeting each other they filled that void in their hearts. It's a beautiful relationship formed out of care, understanding, and compassion. Going on ahead to October 4th in-game is the most well-known full moon in the game, and a date I have covered in every one of my analysis videos up to this point. Let's just cut to the chase since I think we all know what happens here. Shinjiro and Ken are having the most friendly and wholesome chat ever, and Shinjiro ends up sacrificing his life to save Ken from being killed by Takaya, the leader of Shrega. Junpei is witness to this, and the following day at school, he has this reaction to kids talking down upon Shinji.
Anyways, it's crazy that stuff like this really happens, huh? Huh? What the hell's your problem?
Shut up.
Huh? What are you getting up for?
I said shut the hell up!
Since Junpei is a bold guy who fears death and respected Shinji a lot, he's not letting that disrespect go by. And even though he may not have been entirely in the right here, I gotta give Junpei respect for standing on business like that. Besides that, Junpei does learn a lot from his passing. He thinks back on Shinji's last words and whether he'd be able to say the same thing he did. It opens his eyes up to the reality of what they're fighting for, and it helps him to mature greatly. A small part of Junpei I'd like to cover is in the Kyoto Trip on November 17th through the 19th. Nothing too crazy happens for him, but there's an aspect between him and Aigis I want to mention since it's relevant for later on. Throughout the game, it's shown that Aigis has a fondness for Junpei as a person and wants to be more like him in a sense because he is what she views as human in a way. She learns a lot from him and his growth, and as a result, she mimics him and his mannerisms at times, such as these.
Man.
It's a really cute detail, and every time it's shown I love it every time. That's not the only thing for Junpei during this trip though. In the movie, as Ryoji and him are hanging out in their room together, Ryoji explains that Makoto has put a wall around himself as a coping mechanism after the death of Shinji, so the two of them try to liven things up for him when he returns. They do a pretty damn good job if I do say so myself because they, alongside Aigis, are able to get a genuine laugh out of him for the first time. This moment between all of them is heartwarming, and it's just yet another example that Junpei does care for those around him, and that's not just relegated to his love for Chidori either. I think Junpei gets a lot of flack from people for how he acts near the start, but I think we're lying to ourselves if we act like he never cared for others in the first place. Just like all the other members of S.E.E.S, he has his issues, but at the end of the day, he has a good heart. Once they return from the Kyoto trip, Junpei visits Chidori on November 6th, which would be one of the last visits they have together in the journey. During the last full moon, which supposedly ended the Dark Hour, they seemingly killed Jin and Takaya, and Junpei thinks this is why Chidori is upset, but that's not the case. You see, Chidori fears getting close to people, and since she's starting to love Junpei back, she's trying to push him away. Junpei doesn't really understand this and thinks he himself did something wrong, or that she just doesn't like him after all, but he's wrong. It's totally the opposite. And despite the fact that she tells Junpei not to come back, he still doesn't give up on her. The following day, in Junpei's third linked episode event, he stops by the flower shop to find something to give to Chidori and backs out at the last second. He wants to make amends with her, but since he doesn't even know what he did, he doesn't know how to reproach it. He then says this to Makoto.
It feels like I'm trapped in some kind of loop, you know? No matter how motivated I get, it's getting me nowhere. Been that way since I played baseball. Those hero moments, where if I could just hit the ball, man, I'd get so amped. Except I never once got to be the hero. Whenever it was clutch time, I always struck out. And I guess nothing's different now. Thanks. Whew. Feels like I got a huge weight off my shoulders. Didn't think the day would come when I'd be talking to you about my problems, man. But I guess it's not really a secret that I got problems, huh? And besides, I kinda hate to admit it, but the answer you give is probably the right one.
Through these linked episodes, you can really see him change and accept his shortcomings to a certain extent. It's easy for him to get himself fired up, but for one reason or another, he just can't bring himself to become better. This applies to school, his future, his hobbies, and everything else. It's why there's not really much to talk about with this character as others, because he really just does not have anything going for him at this point, which is not me trying to knock him, don't get me wrong. Once Junpei decides not to get the flowers, Makoto decides to buy it himself and pushes Junpei to go visit Chidori again and give them to her. And damn if that wasn't a good ass decision on both of their parts. We don't get to see this moment, but we do know he ended up going through with it. Not too long after, Takaya and Jin break Chidori out of the hospital, since they didn't actually die, and her fear of death is shown very clearly. Like I said, she loves Junpei, and fears getting close to him, so her emotions are all conflicted. On November 22nd, the most important moment for Junpei's entire character arc occurs. These detect a presence outside of Tartarus which happens to be Chidori, and when it's revealed to most likely be a trap, Junpei doesn't care and rushes off anyway to find her, thinking about the risks last. When he arrives there, he tries to make things right with her, but then she attacks him. They're then forced to fight her, and in Reload, you're not actually able to beat her. After every turn, her will to fight fades more and more until she gives up entirely.
Takaya was right. You're all just a nuisance. This pain is nothing compared to the suffering I'm feeling inside. Why? Why won't you leave me alone? I don't know. I don't know anymore. Junpei.
Chidori.
It hurts. I can't breathe. I'm scared.
After she stops fighting, Junpei comes to console her, and she admits all the things I said before. She doesn't necessarily fear death, even now, but she truly fears attachment. Being with Junpei is the embodiment of everything she tries to avoid, and she feels like she has to push him away so she can run away from this fear. And as she begins to admit all of this, Takaya and Jin show up, at which point Junpei is shot and killed. At this moment, Chidori uses her regenerative power to resurrect Junpei from the dead, and as they have a moment together in a dreamlike state, she finally admits that what she wanted all along was to be with him, which is what I've also been saying up to this point. Of course, Junpei reciprocates the feelings, but unfortunately, in order to resurrect someone, Chidori has to sacrifice herself since it takes too much of her energy, and I'm just gonna let this scene play out on its own.
This is how it has to be. But don't worry. I'll protect you, Junpei.
Same. I've got your back. I'll do everything I can to protect you. So come on.
This might be all I ever needed. Just being in each other's arms. It's nice.
Chidori!
I love you, Junpei. Thank you.
Chidori, you're kidding, right? Chidori, say something, please. Chidori!
Pitiful. Such a meaningless end.
Meaningless?
Through the power of their unbreakable bond, Hermes and Medea combine into one to create Trismegistus, Junpei's ultimate persona. Hermes Trismegistus, the full name, is a Hellenistic figure that represents wisdom and knowledge of the material and spiritual worlds. It is a combination of Hermes and Thoth, which is an Egyptian god of wisdom. His full name means Hermes, thrice greatest, and he was referred to as this because of his wisdom of the Greek gods, Egyptian gods, and later the wisdom of stars, since Hermes was associated with astrology and the Hermetic tradition. A religion based off Hermes Trismegistus refers to alchemy, magic, astrology, and stuff like that. He was the founder of these. Trismegistus is a direct evolution of Hermes, showing that he himself didn't change too much in terms of personality, but he simply tapped into his potential and evolved himself as a person, which in turn evolved Hermes into his ultimate form. Junpei awakening to Trismegistus not only shows how he started to tap into his potential, but also how he has found his reason for fighting and living. Before, he was fighting because it was all he had, but now he fights for Chidori's sake, his friend's sake, and the world's sake. It's why Trismegistus' design takes partly the form of Medea, which is Chidori's persona. I really like this awakening because instead of the mythology of the awakened persona being the representation of his heart necessarily, it's mainly the actions and bonds he made with Chidori instead. Like I said, there really isn't too much of a difference between Hermes and Trismegistus. Trismegistus is more or less Hermes, but 3 times better. But honestly, that's just perfect for Junpei. At the end of the day, he's still the upbeat guy he used to be, but now that he's found his purpose in life, he starts to take his life more seriously. He begins getting better grades in school, and thinks about his future more seriously, since Chidori now lives on through him. With his persona awakening more or less covered, we can go into the aftermath of Chidori's passing. After awakening to Trismegistus and fending off Shrega, he says his final goodbyes to Chidori.
Chidori, oh God, this is so hard, but it's not just my life anymore.
Junpei.
In the following week, Junpei is more or less a shell of himself. He needs time to grieve, and this is shown in the added reload scenes where everyone is required to go to a job fair. Ryoji, whom Junpei has become closer to, is worried for him since he didn't come to his job internship, and he says it feels like he's been holding back an unbearable sadness within himself. And it isn't until around 5 or 6 days later on November 28th where he's able to find closure with everything that happened. They retrieve Chidori's sketchbook from the hospital, and they find the final thing Chidori had drawn before she passed away.
What?
It's a detailed portrait of Junpei-san.
Chidori. It's like she's telling me to stop moping around.
Junpei-kun.
Okay, I'm gonna fight to get rid of the Dark Hour. I'm sorry for all the times I snapped at you. I still hate to admit it, but just know I'll be counting on you.
In this moment, the jealousy he had for Makoto has more or less dwindled away, and he snapped out of wanting to play the big hero role for the most part as well. He just wants to get rid of the Dark Hour and put an end to things once and for all, for both Chidori and everyone else's sakes. It's definitely one of the best moments in the game for me, and it shows how Junpei has matured. Also, do you remember how I talked about Yukari picking on Junpei and calling him names like Stupid at the beginning? Well, at this point in the story, she doesn't call him things like that anymore. Everyone around him can see he's changed so much, and they all have a lot more respect for him as a person, and the feeling is mutual. Now that the biggest part of Junpei's character arc is more or less complete, it's time for us to go near the end of the game. On December 3rd, it's revealed that all of the shadows they have defeated have brought upon the fall, which is more or less the end of the world, and Ryoji was the harbinger of the fall. As Ryoji relays this information to them, Junpei is the first to be optimistic about it and says all they gotta do is defeat Nyx. But once it's revealed she apparently can't be beaten, Junpei gets the most scared out of anyone in the group. They're given two options. They can either kill Ryoji and forget everything about the Dark Hour in the fall until it arrives, or they can spare him and face Nyx to the end. They have until December 31st to make their choice, and a week after they are informed of this fate, they have a meeting to discuss what they should do. And once Yukari pokes fun at Junpei, he lashes out and gets angry.
What the hell is wrong with you? You think this is a joke?
Junpei,
His death we're talking about here. Of course I'm scared. And here you all are, just chatting it up like it's a goddamn picnic. Can't you see? We're all gonna die. This whole thing is your fault. You had that thing inside you and didn't even know it. You raised it, damn it! If it weren't for you, none of this would have happened.
Junpei!
You're supposed to be special, right? Then do something about it!
Stop it, Junpei. It's not his fault. And the only reason we even have a choice is because he carried it.
God damn it, I know! It's just, it doesn't matter how many times I tell myself. I know this doesn't fix anything. It scares the hell out of me! I'm sorry. I knew the truth deep down, but still, sorry for being a dick.
Even though he apologizes here after lashing out at Makoto, he feels it isn't a good enough resolution. So in his 4th linked episode, he invites Makoto out to apologize more properly. He admits he just wanted to take his anger out on someone else, and Makoto was a prime target at that moment. He also admits that he was insensitive to Chidori and what she was going through, since she was facing death herself, and now that his own mortality is being threatened, he understands now. Then, Junpei says one of the most thoughtful things he said in the game. He basically says don't worry about what anyone else wants to do regarding Ryoji. Just do what you want to do because you deserve that right after everything you've gone through. Despite the fact that Makoto's decision could make Junpei totally forget Chidori and all of the lessons he's learned at this point, he selflessly says just do what you think is right. This is such a total far cry from how he was at the start of the game that it's almost astonishing that it's even the same character. Someone that had total jealousy over Makoto, someone that was trying to play hero, and someone who didn't have much to live for has transformed into basically the total opposite. It's actually such an amazing character arc, and that's not even the best demonstration of how much he's changed as a person, but I'll get to that in a little bit. There's a few final things to go over before we go into the final battle against Nyx. On December 27th, Junpei and Fuka meet each other on the bench where Junpei had first met Chidori. They both recognize how much they've changed for the better, and they have this back and forth to solidify the resolve to fight Nyx and not forget everything they've gone through.
The future hasn't been written in stone yet, and I want to be true to myself.
True to yourself. You're really something, Fuka. Let's fight together.
Okay.
I don't think I need to explain what I'm thinking here since I think I've said it many times before, but it really is just crazy how much he grew over the course of the game after meeting Chidori. Another example of his growth is when Aigis returns to the dorm after being defeated by Ryoji. They have this back and forth.
So what is my purpose now? I just don't know, and no one can give me an answer.
Well, yeah, you don't have the answers. The meaning of life or death isn't something someone else can just teach you. Making your own decisions is hard, no matter who you are. No choice is perfect, you know? But as long as we're alive, we gotta do something. When you see someone going through the same thing you're going through, you just want to help them. That's how we plan on getting through this. Maybe that wasn't the best explanation, but that's the idea.
Not only does this show his growth, but it leads me into his final linked episode. In the final one, he tells Makoto he wants to start playing baseball again. He still doesn't know what he wants to do in the future, but instead of hating that aspect of himself, he resolves to find the answer, and thanks Makoto for choosing to fight instead of forgetting everything. It really shows he believes in the things he's saying and stands for, and these new reload scenes are just amazing and add so much more context to his character. Oh, and thank God Makoto did not choose to kill Ryoji, because on January 21st, it's revealed Chidori actually managed to live. Thanks to the flowers Junpei brought to Chidori with the help of Makoto, they were able to give her the energy she needed to survive. Not only that, but she's no longer at risk of dying due to the suppressants she was taking either, giving her a way better fate than that of the rest of Strega. The unfortunate part of this though, is that she's lost all memory of Junpei and the Dark Hour, but in Junpei's own words, it's probably for the best. She does remember something though, and that's the fact a warm, kind person was there for her, and she's made it her mission to find them. Needless to say that this was basically the final moment of closure he needed to go into the final battle with no regrets. He's ready to fuck Nyx and Strega's asses up to keep Chidori safe. And if he didn't already have the motivation needed to do that from the start, he definitely has it now. Well, that's more or less everything I feel we need to cover for Junpei's character arc throughout the journey, so we can get into the Judgment Day. Everyone's spirit is fully charged and they're ready to win at any cost. During the final battle, after they fail to defeat Nyx and Makoto awakens to the Universe Arcana to defeat Nyx by himself, Junpei gives one of the most powerful lines in the entire game for me.
I don't believe it! He's going to face it all alone!
No, he's not alone! I'm not letting him die!
God fucking damn, dude. I love Junpei as a character, and I also love his voice actor. Zeno Robinson, if you somehow watch this dude, I love you in everything you do. Anyway, Junpei's faith in Makoto alongside everyone else's gives him the strength to seal and defeat Nyx. And once he does, they're transported to a beautiful space-like area with everyone else. And once Fuka brings up the prospect of him being the only casualty, Junpei is the first to express his disbelief, showing how much he values Makoto as a friend at this point. So finally, the promised day arrives, and everyone has forgotten the events of the Dark Hour and everything that happened as they foresaw happening. And this means Junpei has forgotten about Chidori as well. Thankfully, as Mitsuru is giving her speech during the graduation ceremony, everyone remembers the promise they made to meet on the school rooftop to celebrate their victory. And, well, I think we know how this story ends, unfortunately.
It'll be okay. I'm right by your side, here to protect you forevermore.
So Junpei on that rooftop saw his best friend pass away before his very eyes. The guy who was there for him to hear him out when no one else would. The guy who he trusted with his life. And the guy who helped him bring Chidori back to life has passed away, and he has no clue why. Interestingly though, in the next chapter of Persona 3, which is the answer, he's the one who regresses the least. Even though he lost his best friend, through his own maturity, he's the one who thinks the most logically and rationally out of basically anyone in the entirety of S.E.E.S during the answer. The answer takes place on March 31st, and a new dungeon called the Abyss of Time spawns out from underneath the dorm because of the regret the team had for the death of Makoto. Now, don't get me wrong, even though Junpei is the most rational thinking one here, it isn't like he's free from the regret of how things happened during that final battle. He is still partly the reason the Abyss of Time exists, but when everyone is given the option to either go back in time to before they fought Nyx and Makoto sacrificed himself, or to continue onward as things should be, he's the very first one to express his thoughts on how they shouldn't go back. check out this conversation they have in the dorm after acquiring the keys that they can use to open either door.
So, what's the plan? I mean, no one's seriously thinking about going back to the past, right?
We've all seen what kind of resolve it takes to face death. That resolve, and what it brought about. There's no way we can cancel that out on our own whims. Even if it hurts, we have to deal with it and accept the present.
Don't you understand? We can go back and fix things. Are you seriously just gonna let a chance like this go?
Then I'll ask you this. If I said I wanted to undo your father's death, would you do it? Even if there was a way to reverse Shinji and Miki's death, I'd flat out refuse. Nothing in the past was a waste. You're just making excuses.
I don't know. I get second thoughts when I think about going back to when Chidori died. But I definitely see what Akihiko-senpai is trying to say. When you get down to it, though, I hate to say this, but I'm just too scared to do that battle over.
What's wrong with you? Are you saying you're scared to die, but it's okay if he does?
That's not what I said. I mean, have you really thought this through? Going back to before that battle means we have to fight Nyx again. Did you ever think about what might happen if we lose this time?
He is the main voice of reason here that knows going back in time is a terrible idea, but since they can't come to an agreement, they're gonna have to fight to decide what to do. And even as he is about to fight Aigis and Metis, he's still the voice of reason.
No matter who our opponent is, I won't let them have my sister's... Aigis' key.
I know. It's cool. But you know, no matter which way this turns out, I just don't think Aigis can win against Yucatan right now. Sorry. Then again, I don't think Yucatan's got it right either. Even if we go back to before the final battle, if we're still squabbling like this, I don't know, do you really see us being able to pull off a miracle and do things better than he could? Me, I think this is something we gotta take care of on our own.
Junpei-kun.
I'm not as much of a hard-ass as Akihiko-san, but I don't think we should mess with the past. Still, some things you just can't work out by talking about them. If neither side will give an inch, well, sometimes that's how things are gonna be. Right, little sis?
Now I've seen some people wonder, why didn't Junpei and Koromaru just team up with Aigis and Metis? Well, it's because they didn't even know what choice they were going to make in the first place. I don't think it would have been a good idea for Junpei to team up with help someone who might make a call he just doesn't agree with. And he doesn't team up with Akihiko either because he really doesn't like how he's going about it either. They may share the same ideals, but not in the same way. It's quite ironic that Junpei went from what seemed to be the dumbest person in the group by far to the most logical in this moment. I think if you ask most people who played the answer who was in the right during it, almost everyone would say Junpei. Even though he isn't my favorite character in the answer, I still gotta give props where it's due and say he by far thought things through better than anyone else did. And that's really the extent of his character in the answer. He's just genuinely the smartest character during it. And it really shows everything I've been hammering down throughout this analysis. He became one of the most mature and wise characters in the game, and had some of the largest growth in the game as well. This analysis was interesting to make because it really shows that even though Junpei is an incredibly simple character and concept, his character arc is still one of the most fleshed out in the game. Not every character arc needs to have some crazy overarching twist or anything like that to it. Junpei started as an empty person who felt inferior to those around him, becoming the exact opposite by the end. He became a baseball coach in Ultimax. He was able to love and save Chidori from Strega and her imminent death. And he fought to save the world not because he wanted to be the hero, but because it was the right thing to do. He's one of the gold standards for what a best friend character should be, because it isn't like he blindly followed or liked Makoto from the start. Only through many ups and downs was he able to get closer to Makoto, and it happened because the two of them were willing to understand each other. Like I said at the start, Makoto and Junpei are actually pretty similar in the way they were both empty, but through the bonds they made with those around them, they found the reason to live and fought to the very end for it. It's probably why he understood better than anyone else why Makoto had to sacrifice himself, even if he would have obviously preferred it not to happen at all, since Junpei sacrificed himself for Chidori as well. I wish I had more to add, but if I'm being honest, I just don't think there's any need. In terms of S.E.E.S, he's one of the most simple yet deep and well-written characters, and that's why he's so amazing. It's a character arc I'm sure a lot of people can relate to as well, which makes it even better. Me personally, I can actually relate to Junpei a lot, because for the vast majority of my time in school, I was completely lost and kind of just letting life take me wherever. And it wasn't until my last couple years of high school when I started to take things more seriously. I decided to take a year off of college, and then enrolled afterward a major in athletic training. Helping people has always been something I've been interested in, and when I saw Junpei do something similar by becoming a baseball coach in Ultimax, it really warmed my heart. With all of that said though, that wraps up my in-depth analysis of Junpei Iori from Persona 3. Did you enjoy Junpei as a character? Can you relate to Junpei at all? Is there anything I missed that you would have wanted to see? I want to hear what you all think. So as always, I'll be replying to every comment on this video. Responding to everyone is by far my favorite aspect of making these videos for sure. Alright, I don't want to take any more of your time, but if you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and a subscribe. It's been your boy Yandere Gogeta, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out and have a great day.